Hello, I'd like to share a brief presentation with you to introduce the concept of digital open badges and how they can be used in higher education, and in particular how they have been already used in GMIT. So in this session we're going to have a look at three key questions. First of all, what is a digital badge? Secondly, how can digital badges be used in higher education? And finally, the impact that digital badges have had on the civil engineering degree here in GMIT, where they were used as an intervention as part of an undergraduate module. So first of all, the idea of what a badge is. Well, badges have been around for a very long time. There's something that you'd be familiar with from the example on the screen here now, the Girl Guides, the Boy Scouts. You'll also be familiar with them from things like the military. So they've been around for a very long time, and some of them are very familiar. So just for example there, you have that particular type of badge, which when you see somebody wearing that symbolizes authority. And really what these badges boil down to is a communication device which will tell the reader or the viewer what that person means. It adds some kind of a meaning to the person who's displaying the badge. So we've got that type of a badge that you'll be familiar with. We've also got this type of a badge here, which again will tell you something about the person or the organization who's displaying it. It's an emblem of some kind of status. And finally we have this type of badge here, which again is communicating something about the organization, or in this case the institute, who has earned the right to display that badge. So it's just a way of communicating something to a reader. So we've had them for a long time. They've been around, as I said, from the military, from the Boy Scouts, and more recently we've seen versions of ones there like the Gardaí, the TripAdvisor, and the Institute of Technology of the Year. So we're familiar with the idea of a badge. The concept is something that we know from before. But we have to be aware now that this is moving more into an electronic and into a more digital space, where social media and social networking is something where badges can intersect with that facet of our lives. So we've had them around for a long time, but being digital adds an extra element to it. They're no longer just a pretty picture. So for example, if we think back to the TripAdvisor badge, that particular image that I got is just a sticker somebody put on their restaurant window. But online versions of that are just a little picture. That's all they are. They don't have any real information behind them, and they're owned by TripAdvisor. If you write a review and you get a badge from TripAdvisor, it's not really your badge. You can't do anything with it. They still own it. It only exists on their platform. So being digital is one facet of that. It's online, it's electronic, but being an open badge adds a little bit more to it. So this is a typical diagram you'll see when you start looking into digital badges. It's called the anatomy of a digital badge. And you can see here on the left hand side we've got the badge image, and it's being peeled away, and in behind it you get this lovely gory picture of what's going on behind. But the main thing you need to know is that there is this metadata behind the image. It's not just a JPEG. Okay, so you've got the badge name will be part of it. You've got a description of the badge. You've got the criteria that the earner had to meet in order to receive the badge. You've got information about who issued it. You've got information about the evidence. So for example, if a student or a colleague produces something like a blog post or something like that as part of their assessment or as part of their CPD, that blog post can be added to the badge. So later on a recipient can share the badge online in a CV or on LinkedIn or whatever, and a reader can then click on the badge and see that evidence to get a link to exactly why the earner received the badge. And the date it was issued is the last kind of standard bit of information that will be contained within the badge. So it's more than just a picture. There's metadata behind it. The metadata tends to be mostly textual, so a description which you will type in, but it also can contain things like the evidence. So as an example there, a URL which would direct the reader to a blog post or to an online video that you might have produced. Whatever it may be, you can put in hypertext and link it to web pages as well. So how can digital open badges be used in higher education? I'm going to start off by saying that the possibilities are endless. It's pretty much up to yourself what you want to do. There's no kind of right and wrong about this. There's certainly guidance, and there's certainly what would be considered maybe best practice, but it's still an emerging field, so you're not really limited. You can try anything you want. But just for a few examples, adding value to assessment feedback. So normally we give feedback to our students in terms of either a grade, it's numerical feedback, or we may add a little bit extra to that by giving them maybe a description of a written description of what they did right and what they did wrong and what they need to focus on. And the badge can do that in a little bit more detail. And the value that it adds is that the student can then share that feedback. And they can, if they do very well in an assessment, for example, they're not just going to get a grade, but they're also getting a badge for it, which they can then use for links to employability, for example. So it adds a little bit more to the value for the student rather than just getting either just a text or a number. Micro-credentialing aspects of a module. So, for example, if you have a module that's 100% continually assessed, there may be little elements within that where students have performed very, very well. And at the end of the year, they're only going to get a single number. They're just going to get a grade at the end of the year for the whole module. But within that, if there were aspects that they had performed really, really well at, the digital badge is a way to actually recognize and reward that type of performance. It doesn't replace the end of the year final grade, but it certainly adds value to the student experience, because they can now say, well, I was really, really excellent at that particular part of the module, and the badge will describe to the reader what the student had to do to receive it. So again, there's a potential link to employability there. If the student or graduate is going for work and there are aspects of the module which would suit that particular job, then a badge for that aspect is something that they might want to make more prominent on their CV. Otherwise, a single final grade percentage at the end of the year doesn't really tell the entire story of what they did during that module. Acknowledging learner behaviour that may otherwise go unrecognised. So there are a couple of examples here, particularly around attendance. We know that some students attend very well, some students don't attend very well, but the ones who do attend, there is a correlation between attendance and overall academic performance. So to encourage them to attend, you could create a badge for, we'll say, 100% attendance, for an example. And you can acknowledge that they have behaved in a certain way by issuing that badge to them. Another example of behaviour that might be normally would go unrecognised would be, say, peer learning. So if you have students that are helping each other and they're making a little community of practice for themselves, that's an excellent way for them to learn. But it's something that we can see happening maybe in our classrooms, but we don't have any way to actually kind of prove it or say, well done for doing that, because this is something that you will need. It's a skill you will need as you progress through your career. So it's a way to acknowledge things that are beyond simply giving a grade. These are activities and behaviours that are outside or, I suppose, maybe complementary to assessment. Motivating learners to engage in social activities. So this goes back to the peer learning, I suppose, where we want to encourage students to create their own communities and create opportunities for peer learning. And certainly even things like awarding a badge for participating in a discussion forum on Moodle, for example. There's a lot of learning to be had from that type of activity, and a badge might be a way just to incentivize or to encourage students to take part in that type of activity. They can be used as a stepping stone into employment, so this is particularly important, particularly relevant if you have a badge that is described and designed with the collaboration of an employer. So what we're having here is we have students who are earning badges that employers have said, this is the type of thing we want a graduate to be able to do. And if you can link a badge to that type of activity and behaviour, well, straight away the employer is going to recognise that at the point of a job application or at the point of interview, and it gives the employers something to ask about, and it also gives the students something to talk about when they're in an interview. So I suppose it's the idea of just giving our students a little bit of an edge, something extra that makes them stand out from applications that may not have this type of information on them. So all of these things have already happened in GMIT as part of the pilot study. conducted in the civil engineering program. So these are very real examples of things that can be done and have been done and have been evaluated in GMIT at this stage. So we know that they work. We know that they are something that all the stakeholders do enjoy and see value in. But going back to my original point on this slide, you can be creative as you like in how you use the digital open badges. The bullet points that are on that slide are certainly not the only things you can do, but it's I suppose it's a starting point really if you're wondering what the functions of them are. Ultimately, what the badges allow the students to do is to tell a story about themselves. Particularly, I suppose, if we're looking at the employment stage or the prospective employment stage, the story that the students can tell about themselves is something that's going to be a factor in gaining employment, and the badges help to tell a full story. And I suppose one of the things we find in traditional, or I suppose the kind of the normal way we deal with students when we give them a transcript is they get a subject name or a module name and they get a final grade, and that's the transcript they get when they have a degree. And that's a little bit fuzzy. It does give you information about the module name and the performance that they had overall, but it is a bit fuzzy. It doesn't really tell the entire story of what the student was like. So digital badges are a way to allow us to focus in and to clarify exactly what the story is that the student can tell about themselves. And it goes beyond just a numerical grade. It will encompass a lot more factors than just that. And it's this ability to be able to tell your story that's going to set you apart at the job interview. I keep going back to the job interview stage, but the badges have roles beyond that. But that's the one, I suppose, that would be easiest to focus in on when you're thinking about developing badges for yourself. Just think about what employers want and think, is there a way that we can verify that kind of skills and attributes are present in our graduates? If those things are already present and clearly defined within a single numerical grade, that's fine, but there are going to be skills that are outside of assessments that our employers are going to be interested in, and the badges are a way to capture those type of activities and behaviours with our students so that they can tell their story at the job interview. So how has all of this been used in GMIT and what have the outcomes been? Well, as part of a doctorate study, a two-phase approach was taken, which was a kind of an action research / case study. It was kind of a hybrid approach using qualitative and quantitative techniques. Phase one was where there was a consultation with various stakeholders about what they felt about badges and which ones they felt would be important to include in the trial. The stakeholders involved were the students, lecturing staff in the department, an institute manager, and an employer based in the local office of a multinational and multidisciplinary engineering firm with about 5,500 employees globally. So they were all asked in interviews. The students were surveyed, and they also took part in a learning journal where they reflected on their classroom activities every week. And resulting from that, a suite of badges was developed, which I've called the starter pack. Now, I'll show you the starter pack in a second. These are based on a single module within civil engineering in first year, the computer-aided design module. So these are not across the entire program, they're not across the entire department, they're just within one module. Phase two then focused on actually studying what the implementation of that starter pack would look like, and also the impact of using the badges on the learning environment and particularly on the students' learning experience. And I suppose ultimately what I was aiming for with this pilot study was to increase engagement with the students and to increase motivation with the students. The overarching objective, I suppose, really was to see, could badges influence retention? Now, retention is very complex, kind of a thing to try and measure in terms of what we can do to influence it. It's not that straightforward because many of the factors that influence retention are beyond the control of the institute, certainly beyond the control of us as lecturers at the coalface. But there are some elements of retention that we could influence, and engagement and motivation are two that we can play a role in. So that's what I focused on, the engagement and the motivation, not retention itself per se, because that's a lot more complex. So let's have a look at the starter pack. This was run out over the academic year 2017-2018, and I'll just show you what it looks like here now. So we have a number of badges here which were developed based on two factors really. They were based on the stakeholder consultation in phase 1, and also based on a literature review of what other people had done. So that's how the badge map looks. They're all related to a single module, and I'll quickly talk you through the various different aspects of that map now. So across the middle here we have the ones that are related to assessments, and these are open to a student who gets over 80% in any particular assessment. So every student in the class, if they got over 80%, would be eligible for one of those badges. They weren't a kind of a one-off thing that only one person could get. Anybody with a grade of over 80% in an assessment could obtain those badges. There were two main capstone or milestone assessments within the module. The first one being the winter test, and the second one being the CAD project at the end of the year. And for those ones, I included badges for the best grade in class. Okay, so only one person in the class could get each of those. So it gave the people who were maybe competitive, it gave them an incentive to really try harder and go for those badges. We then have the improver badges, which between two consecutive assessments, the students showing a grade increase were eligible for the improver badge. Now these ones were important because the normal assessment badges were available for people with over 80%. However, if a student got, we'll say, even 40% in the first assessment and 45% in the second assessment, they're not eligible for the high performance ones because they haven't got 80%. But they are eligible for the improver ones because they're showing a progression within the module. And I think it was important to recognize that, and the students have actually confirmed that obtaining those badges gave them a confidence boost. We then have the level up badges, which are available for students that show improvement in an ipsative iteration. So the way that those ones worked was that if a student took part in an assessment and they felt afterwards, for whatever reason, that they didn't perform to their best, they were allowed to have a second attempt at the assessment. The grade from their first attempt was what was recorded for calculating the final grade in the module, so they did not get a grade increase for the second attempt. What they got instead was, if their second attempt was of a higher quality than their original attempt, they got the level up badge. So the idea behind that badge is that it's for a student who recognizes some kind of a weakness in their skill set and is willing to take on extra time and extra work to prove that they are capable of performing to a higher standard than they did in the exam situation. We then have the buddy badges. These were available to all students by nomination. So the way that these ones worked was that if a student was helpful to their classmate, the classmate that got helped was eligible to, or was entitled to, make a nomination to say, look, this person helped me, here's what they did, here's when they did it, and I'd like to nominate them for a badge. And when the students got a certain number of nominations, they were eligible to obtain the bronze level badge, and it worked up into silver and gold level depending on number of nominations. So the way the nominations worked, the mechanics behind them, was that there was an activity set up on Moodle where a student could basically fill in a nomination form. I reviewed those forms, and the students were then issued the badge if the nomination made sense. Most of the time with these modules, you kind of see students working together in small groups. This is a computer-aided design module which takes place in a CAD room, a computer room. So I can see pairs of students working, I can see them helping each other, and I've seen that for years now. But there was no real way to say, look, this is something that's really good, and here's how to reward it. We didn't have that until we kind of ran with these buddy badges. So it's a way to kind of recognize peer learning, essentially, and the building of a community of practice within the class cohort. So they were open to everybody by nomination. And then we had the mystery badges, which the students knew about. They knew that there were some badges, but they didn't know what they were going to be about. I didn't declare at the start of the year what they were, the earning mechanisms for them. They transpired to be mostly related to attendance. So one of the mystery badges was for 100% attendance in semester 1. Another badge was for 100% attendance in semester 2, and there was the third mystery badge for 100% attendance over the entire academic year. I'll show you some details on those badges in a second. There was one last mystery badge which was developed in collaboration with the employer, where myself and the employer sat down for a couple of hours at a meeting, and we discussed what the attributes, the graduate attributes that they would like to see, and the badge was designed around that. And what the employer had said was that he would be most interested in a student who had obtained a lot of the buddy badges. The highest grade didn't come into the conversation. It was the buddy badges that the employer was really keen to know about, because he interpreted the buddy badge to mean that the recipient would be a good team player, somebody who would be able to fit into the workplace, take on board some learning, and also distribute some learning. So it was kind of the teamwork and the social skills that the employer was valuing, and as a result of that conversation, the last mystery badge that was developed was the Best Mentor in Class badge. That badge was branded with GMIT and also branded with the company who the employer represented. So mentoring seems to be a key attribute that the employer was after, and until this point in this particular module, there was no way for myself or GMIT to actually really recognize that in any kind of a way. So the buddy badge there became a vehicle for identifying students with attributes that an employer valued higher than performance in an assessment. As I said, the top student in the class was not necessarily the students that the employer wanted to know more about. So just to show you a little bit more detail on the metadata that goes into these badges, this is the 100% attendance over the entire year badge, which you can see the graphics for here, but it also tells the reader a little bit more. What you're seeing here is what an employer or a family member or a friend would see if they clicked onto the badge that the recipient shared with them. So you can see here that it comes from GMIT, it's branded by the college, it's related to the CAD module, which is also covered over here. The date of the academic year is clearly stated there as well, and it tells a little bit more to the reader about the badge. And in particular, what I think is important here is that it tells the reader exactly what was involved in the module. So here we can see over the full academic year, students will have received a maximum of 78 hours class contact time between tutorials and lectures. Straight away, that's a piece of detail that would not come across in a transcript. So now when an employer sees that, they see two key things. Number one, the recipient is reliable. They turn up. They're going to be committed to coming to work every day. Or certainly they were when they were in college. This is a first year badge, so when the student was in first year, they were very committed. The second thing it tells an employer is that as part of coming to the class 100% of the time, they've got 78 hours of teaching on this particular piece of software, this computer-aided design software. They are two things that will not come across in a transcript, which only shows a final grade for the module. The next badge I want to show you in a little bit of detail is the Leveling Up badge. I mentioned this one already, and this is something that came up in phase 2 when I re-interviewed the employer. This badge is something that the employer really saw a high value in. So with this one, again, it's describing the badge up here, telling the reader that it's to do with the first assessment on the computer-aided design module in year 1 on the degree in civil engineering at GMIT. And it also says the criteria that the student had to do. So it says to earn this badge, the recipient undertook extra work to improve on their performance in the first assessment. And the extra work took the form of a second attempt at the assessment, which measured the following aspects. So now the reader knows exactly what was in the assessment, not just the final grade. In fact, the final grade doesn't come into this at all. But the reader now knows that the student went back and did extra work to learn how to select a drawing template, to learn how to manage the drawing properly, to learn how to use different coordinate systems within the drawing, to draw basic shapes, to draw basic and edit basic polylines, and to use and select the appropriate layers. So it's giving the reader a lot more fine detail about what the student actually had to do in the assessment, and also what they had to do subsequent to the assessment to improve on their performance. And it also says here, no change in grade is associated with this badge, the student's first attempt is the official grade awarded. However, the earner of this badge has shown that they are motivated to improve their CAD skills even where a grade reward is not available. So again, very clearly telling the reader what the student is like. The last badge I'm going to show you in a bit of detail is the buddy badge, and again I'm picking on this one because the employer was keen on this one as it showed a level of team working skills and interpersonal skills which are vital to the workplace. So again, it talks here a little bit about the student saying that they've been awarded this because they were nominated by a classmate for it. And it talks about peer learning, collaboration and communication skills, which are essential for in the classroom and also essential for the workplace. So it gives the reader a little bit more information about the student. It says here, every student on the module has the opportunity to earn this badge. Now that's an interesting point, because one of the things that the employer said was that when badges become something that are the norm on a CV or in a job application, a lack of badges will tell its own story about the students. So when we get to the point where GMIT students are including badges on their CV, employers are going to get used to it. They're going to look at it, they're going to go, okay, I know what this is, I recognize it, let's talk about it in the interview. And when the employers get used to that type of conversation, a CV coming in without badges is going to become another type of conversation piece. So the employer was very keen to point that out, that when these become the norm, they tell the story about the person who has them, but they also may tell some kind of a story about the person who hasn't got them. The question at the interview will be then, all these other people from GMIT have got these badges, why do you not have any? So from phase 2, I want to just share a couple of key findings just to wrap up this presentation, introduction to badges. The first thing is that all stakeholder groups recognize multiple values and multiple roles for the badges. There's no single role that the badge can take on. There are multiple roles, and therefore you may need to consider using multiple different types of badges. In total, 13 roles have been identified by the stakeholders. These are not identified by me. These have been identified by the students, the lecturing staff, the institute manager and the employer. So 13 roles have been identified. 7 enablers for participation have been identified. Now, this was important to me because, remember, one of the things I wanted to look at here was the engagement of the students. So I wanted to make sure that they felt involved and that they were able to participate properly. So I'll show you those in detail in a second. Generally speaking, the badges are seen as a positive addition to the module. All stakeholders were very positive towards the use of them. In the survey, just under 60% of the students surveyed said that the badges motivated them. So that's good. It's not brilliant. It's not 100%. So I think there is a bit of caution to be had there, and that's why I've included the word generally speaking. Not every student felt motivated by them, but I suppose there's no kind of golden bullet or silver bullet that's going to capture everything. So I suppose this is one step towards motivating and engaging the students. It's not going to absolutely work for everybody. However, the students did report changing behaviour as a result of the badges being available to them, and the prime example here is students saying that they decided to come to class because they knew that there was a 100% attendance badge available to them if they continued to come to class. So here we have students who are potentially on the fence, will I or won't I come to class today? And the students reporting that they did come because of the badges being available to them. So I think that's an important one to factor in, and certainly I think there's a case to be made for having attendance badges at some level, whether you call that 100% attendance or over 90% attendance, however you want to describe it. I think there's definitely a strong case to be made for having a badge that recognises a high level of attendance. It does make the students come to class. Motivation was the other thing, as well as engagement. Motivation was what I wanted to look at. Now, the students didn't show a change in motivation type across the year. They were highly intrinsically motivated from beginning to end. So there was no shift between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. That stayed very steady. However, the level of motivation did change. It significantly increased over the year that it was trialed in terms of interest and enjoyment. So the students enjoyed the module more. They were interested in the module more as a result of the badges. Two of the students at interview stage used the word intrigue, that the badges added intrigue to the module. Now, I've been teaching in GMIT since 2008. I've never heard a student say to me before that they were intrigued by the module. So that's an emotional response coming from the students, which I think would be good to nurture and to tap into. Certain badges have been identified as vital to future implementation. I think there are 3 badges that are very worthwhile for consideration. I think the attendance badge, as I mentioned, if that has an effect of making students come to class, that's a huge positive change in behaviour that we can tap into. The second badge I think that would be important would be the level up badge, because the employer really tapped into that one in the sense that it shows a personality trait in the student that the employer would love to see in the workplace. This whole idea of not performing perfectly, but having enough kind of conscientious approach that you go back and try again and fix something. And the employer said that he wants that type of person who's not just going to close the computer down at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening. The level up badge indicates the type of person who might say, well, look, it's 5 o'clock now, but it's still not right. I want to fix this. And the level up badge can capture that. And the third type of badge that I think would be important to consider for any badge scheme would be the buddy badges, because they build this little community of practice. They build confidence, but also academically, from a pedagogical point of view, they're important because it's peer learning, and I think that's something that needs to be captured. Now, you might notice that the 3 badges I've mentioned, attendance, leveling up, and the buddy badges, none of those 3 have anything to do with assessments per se. They're not a badge that replaces a grade. They're badges that tell something more about the student who's earned them than a grade. This slide here shows the 13 roles of badges that emerged from the pilot study on the left, and on the right hand side you can see the enablers for participation, which allowed all stakeholders to feel involved in the project, which I think is valid for people moving forward with badge development. It's important that the students in particular feel involved in the entire process. So if you can design them in consultation with the students, that's fantastic. Or if you want to take your starting point as some of the work that I've already done, because that technically has some collaboration already in there, that's fine too. But I think involving them and informing them and making the students feel that they have ownership and control over the badges is something that will definitely enable participation and promote and incentivize participation. And on the left hand side you can see the 13 different roles that the badges have had on the pilot study taking place in GMIT recently. So, just to finish up this introduction, really, this slide is kind of, I suppose, communicating that there's a bit of a mess. It's a bit untidy, and you might feel that you're still a bit unsure about the digital badges and what they do and how you could use them. But the message is not to panic, because there are various different digital open badge workshops that are available in GMIT, where you can take part and you can actually develop, design, issue and receive a digital badge all in the space of a couple of hours. So there's a small bit of IT involved in it, but essentially it's very straightforward software to use. If you can send an email and if you can include an attachment on an email, then you'll be able to use the software. It's very straightforward, web-based platforms. So there are outlets and there are workshops available for you that you can use. So I've included a couple of resources here that you can, websites you can visit, where you'll get a lot more information from the badges if you want to delve a little bit deeper into them. They're all very good resources. They have excellent information on them. And if you want to contact me at any stage, you have my email address there. My extension is 2429 within the college. There's an About Me webpage where it gives you various different links to things that I've done. I'm on Twitter, and I'm also on Mastodon. So please feel free to reach out and get in touch. And if you have any questions, what I'm proposing to do very shortly is to produce a set of frequently asked questions about digital badges, which I hope will be helpful to people who are starting out. So please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about digital badges.